now to the other side of the aisle. Let's check in with Senator Eric Schmitt of Missouri. Great to have you with us, Senator. And I want to start off where we started with Senator Warner, which is the idea of what's going on in Ukraine. We've got brand new polling from the Reagan National Defense Forum. This is their survey asking the question, which approach to resolving the conflict between Russia and Ukraine do you think the U.S. should push for? At the top of the list, we've got support Ukraine's full territorial sovereignty. Next down on the list, 20 points behind, Ukraine cedes territory in exchange for a ceasefire and security guarantees. What we know of this deal, it sounds like it's going to ask a lot from the Ukrainians as far as giving up territory, including some that's not even currently under Russian control. What's your take?
Well, I think this administration, by the way, President Trump ran on the idea of resolving this bloody war. I mean, this is a meat grinder at this point, and he wants to stop the killing. I think President Trump approaches this as a realist, right? You take the world as it is, not how you want it to be, not how you wish it would be, but actually how it is. And the truth of the matter is, and a lot of people won't say it, is the Ukrainians have been losing for a long time. They've lost 20% of their territory. They have a manpower problem. They have a munitions problem. I think what President Trump is trying to accomplish is maintain Ukrainian sovereignty, make sure there's a pathway to rebuild the country, and also lessen the likelihood that this will ever happen again. And so they put forward a proposal, a framework. Secretary of State Rubio, the Secretary of the Army Driscoll, they're all in Geneva right now working with the Ukrainians, working with the Europeans to try to get to some consensus here on the 28 points. I would say that most of those, at least half of those, have been talked about for a long time, and there's a lot of agreement. So you got to narrow the gap now and try to get to a place where you recognize the realities on the ground. And I have to say that the Washington consensus has been so wrong about this, Shannon, for so long, and they've been wrong about a lot of things over the last 30 years. President Trump is coming in and saying, we want to actually end the killing, because the people that are critical of this right now, they don't really have another plan. And they live in this fantasy world that another round of sanctions or another round of weapons or another round of cash is going to solve the problem, and it won't. And so I think you recognize the realities and you try to bring the parties together to end the war and make sure this doesn't happen again.
Okay, here's one assessment of what we know so far about this plan. Again, it's in flux. Negotiations are continuing today. Saying this, it locks in Russia's territorial gains, cedes additional unoccupied territory in the Donbass, prohibits NATO membership by legal statute, and strips Ukraine of the long-range strike capabilities it needs to blunt another offensive. Such a deal guarantees only one outcome, a future attack by Moscow, where it can truly finish the job. So what's your message to Mr. Zelensky about why he should sign this deal as it now stands after 3+ years of a lot of sacrifice by his country?
Well, let's be clear. The Ukrainians have been valiant here and very courageous in defending their country. But I think, the situation on the ground now is one that this is ripe again for striking a peace. I would say that the issues related to security guarantees and territorial disputes or issues or gains that Russia has made and what would be included, that's still part of the ongoing, I think, negotiation that's happening right now in Geneva. So I don't think those in particular are set in stone. But I do think there's a willingness, hopefully, for all the parties to come together. Because like I said, there really isn't an alternative here, Shannon. The people who want to thump their chest and say that this should go on forever are ignoring the realities on the ground. And I think President Trump is taking, again, a very realist approach here and saying that this thing has gone on long enough. The killing has to stop. It is where it is, whether you like it or not. And I think, again, to maintain Ukrainian sovereignty, to give them a pathway to prosperity in the future through investment, and then also making sure this doesn't happen again is all part of, I think, the upside here for Ukraine, as opposed to continuing a war and possibly losing even more territory.
Okay, I want to jump to something that the BBC said about this, and this is the security guarantees I talked about with Senator Warner. We don't know the contours of exactly what they would be. They say this, there's no detail on who would provide them and how robust they might be. This falls well short of a NATO-style Article 5 commitment to treat an attack on Ukraine as an attack on all. Kyiv would want more than a vague promise if it were to sign up. Now, you're generally an America First guy, a segment of our country that does not want to see us entangled in a lot of other foreign issues and foreign conflicts, certainly. So what is your take on what kind of security guarantee we should be giving to Ukraine?
Well, I think, look, the American people have grown tired of this sort of Wilsonian adventurism that's dominated permanent Washington for the last 30 years under the guise that America can be everywhere all at once all the time. We live in a world of scarcity. The United States of America needs to refocus its attention in a much more meaningful way on the homeland, our hemisphere, and then taking on our chief adversary, which is China. So what does that mean? It means the Europeans have to step up in a much more meaningful way. Op-eds don't win wars. Rhetoric doesn't win wars. Percentages of GDP that don't go to munitions don't win wars. It's time for the Europeans to step up in a much more meaningful way for the defense of their own continent.
Bottom line, critics think that this is an agreement that incentivizes Putin. I mean, he acted by force. He may end up with territory that wasn't his. What do you say to them about whether or not this gives him the signal that this kind of action may be permitted in the future?
Well, look, I don't think that if you're going to get to a compromise here, Russia's not going to get everything they want. Ukraine's not going to get everything they want. That's the nature of a compromise. That's the nature of a peace deal. And so that's kind of the process that's playing out right now. But I will just say, like, we're at where we're at. Whether you obviously the invasion is something that nobody wanted to see. I think if President Trump was in office, it never would have happened. The only time Russia ever moved, whether it was in Crimea or in Ukraine, is when you had Democrat weak presidents who, again, are some of the same folks that are projecting all of this advice right now. So my belief is that President Trump is the right guy. He's got the right team in place to broker a peace, and we should all be rooting for that. Okay,
I want to ask you quickly about Venezuela, because there's growing criticism as we build up our forces in that area and these continued strikes on what the administration says they are sure are drug trafficking boats in the area. Washington Post reporting this, because now we're talking about potentially plans for acting inside the country. At least that's been the allegation. President Trump and his top White House aides pushed for lethal strikes on Western Hemisphere drug traffickers almost as soon as they took office in January, and in the past 10 months have repeatedly steamrolled or sidestepped government lawyers who questioned whether the provocative policy was legal. That's according to multiple current and former officials familiar with the debates. I'll ask you the same question I asked Senator Rick Scott last week. At what point do you think you need to assert your powers as the legislative branch, as Congress, to get involved with these operations?
Well, we've been advised and we should have our oversight role, but the truth is these are core Article 2 powers, and I find it interesting that the Washington Post is always, citing these anonymous sources all the time for these stories that are totally bogus and lack any legal backing. The truth is we ought to be making sure that our interests are respected in our own hemisphere. That includes having aircraft carriers in our own hemisphere. It also means taking out narco-terrorists who are finding new ways to poison Americans. So the southern border is effectively closed, Shannon. That's how they got a lot of the poison into America. That's killing up to 100,000 people a year. Now they're on the open seas. They're on the high seas, and we have every right to blow those boats out of the water. And so President Trump's justified in doing it. But again, I think it's just this effort to kind of undermine the president's decision-making here, which I think the Congress supports.
And quickly, to a surprise on Friday night, the announced resignation of Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene after many dust-ups with President Trump, after being one of his biggest supporters. National Review says this: she was chased from her office, which proves that few, if any, GOP lawmakers can survive his direct and baleful gaze. Do you think there's room in the GOP for people who openly disagree with the president?
I think we've got a lot of different views in this country. I think the one thing that's clear, though, a lot of people that wrote President Trump off, he came back in a historic comeback. He swept all the battleground states and won the popular vote. He has a mandate to govern. People can have all kinds of opinions, and that's certainly tolerated in the party, but we've got a job to do. So wish her all the best, but we've got a job to do now, which is to deliver the promises that President Trump made on the campaign trail. I think he's done a great job doing that. The Congress has moved the middle-class tax cut bill. We got his team in place, a team of reformers. We moved a rescissions package. I think you're going to continue to see us focus on affordability. So there's a lot of work to do, and I'm excited about it.
Well, the American people will be happy to hear that work on the economy, especially. Senator, always good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Shannon.
Okay, a group